a silence that didn't feel normal. It was the kind of silence that comes when people stop hoping, when they stop believing something can be saved. Across the Allied worlds, on hundreds of outposts and stations, that same heavy silence hung. In the air, the war had been going on for months, and everyone could feel that things were starting to fall apart. Every day, officers received reports from the front lines, and every day the updates looked almost the same. Outpost lost, convoy destroyed, reinforcements delayed, enemy forces advancing faster than expected. Even the most optimistic commanders began to admit the truth. They were losing the war, and they were losing it badly. The enemy wasn't just stronger. They were adapting faster, hitting smarter, and pushing deeper into their territory. On many bases, soldiers walked from post to post with tired eyes. They didn't joke as much. They didn't talk about going home. People whispered that maybe they wouldn't win this time. Maybe the enemy really had figured out something new, something no one could fight. In one command center, the glow of blue screens reflected on everyone's faces. Officers stood around a large table-like display showing the battlefield. Red markers enemy positions spread like a stain over the map. Blue markers, their own forces, were small and scattered. Every few minutes, one blue dot blinked and disappeared. No one needed to ask what that meant. Some members of the Allied Council tried giving speeches to lift spirits, but even they looked unsure. They talked about unity, about standing strong, about remembering past victories. But people could see the fear behind their words. The truth was simple. Nothing they tried was working. Every defensive plan failed. Every offensive move collapsed. The enemy had learned their patterns and was using them against them. It wasn't just soldiers feeling the weight. Civilians on distant colonies or packing emergency supplies. Families lived close to shelters. Cargo ships traveled with dimmed lights, hoping not to attract attention. Whole regions went quiet, trying to survive. And still, one question kept returning in hushed conversations. Why hadn't the humans stepped in yet? For months, Earth had watched from the edge of the conflict. Not because they didn't care, but because they refused to enter a war without understanding it fully. Humans had a reputation. They didn't rush into fights. They prepared. They studied. And when they finally acted, things usually changed fast. Some allies believed humans were waiting for the right moment. Others feared humans simply didn't want to be involved. But one thing was certain. Many worlds hoped Earth would eventually step forward. They remembered past disasters where humans had turned the tide with unexpected ideas, strange tactics, and unbelievable resilience. But for now, humans remained silent observers, sending only small teams, advisors, and data collectors. They stayed behind the curtain while the Allied forces struggled at the front. On a distant outpost stationed near the conflict line, a small squad watched enemy ships streak across the sky like falling stars. One of them muttered that they wouldn't last another month. No one disagreed. The enemy moved with a confidence that was impossible to deny. They didn't hide. They didn't hesitate. They attacked like they already believed they had won. Back in the main war chamber of the Council, tension filled the air as senior leaders argued about what to do next. Some wanted to retreat from entire sectors to save troops. Others wanted one last massive attack to show resistance. But the truth was they didn't have enough power left for either choice. One counselor slammed a report onto the table, his voice shaking. "Everything we built is slipping away," he said. "We cannot keep losing like this." Another added, "If we keep fighting this way, the outcome is already written." Someone finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "We need help. Real help. And there's only one place we can get it." The room went quiet. Everyone knew who they meant. Humans. The decision to contact Earth wasn't made lightly. Asking for help meant admitting they couldn't fix the situation alone. It meant showing weakness, even to allies. But staying silent meant certain defeat. So the Council sent a message, marked with the highest urgency, asking Earth to intervene, or at least to guide them. The message took hours to reach Earth and more hours to get a reply. The Council sat waiting, watching screens, their hands tapping nervously. When Earth finally responded, their answer surprised everyone. They didn't ask about borders, politics, or even military resources. They asked for one thing: information. Raw battlefield logs, enemy movement patterns, supply chain routes, surveillance footage, old reports, damaged reports. Anything and everything related to the war. Some council members were confused. Others were skeptical. Why would anyone want to look through thousands of hours of chaotic, incomplete, overwhelming data? But humans insisted. They said they wouldn't act until they understood the full picture. So the Allies sent the data, everything they had, even the parts they didn't fully trust. Across Earth, human analysts and strategists disappeared into closed command centers, leaving only screens showing restricted access. People joked that if anyone could find something useful in that mountain of information, it would be humans. They had a reputation for noticing things others ignored. While humans studied. The war kept going and kept getting worse. An Allied cruiser was ambushed while returning from a supply run, leaving dozens stranded in space. A defensive station along a major trade route fell after only a few hours of fighting. Each loss made the enemy bolder and the Allies more desperate. In one small colony, families gathered around emergency radios to hear the latest updates. Children asked why the fighting wouldn't stop. Adults didn't know how to answer. They just hoped help would come before the enemy reached their planet. Days passed with no major change, until finally, Earth sent a second message. This time, it was short. Very short. Humans requested control of one major operation. Just one. No details, no promises. They only asked that Allied forces trust them. Some council members were nervous. Giving control to another species felt risky, even if they were allies. But deep down, they knew the truth. They had run out of options. They needed a new approach, something different from every strategy they'd used before. And humans were known for doing things differently. So they agreed. At a human command site, lights flickered to life as teams mobilized. People moved with quiet confidence, not carelessness, but calm focus. They didn't talk about revenge or glory. They talked about patterns, maps, variables, timing. They talked about what could be changed instead of what was already lost. One Allied observer watching from the side whispered to a colleague, "They're not scared at all." The colleague replied, "No, they're planning for the first time in months. Something shifted, not on the battlefield yet, but in the air, in the mood. A sense that maybe, just maybe, things weren't completely hopeless. As humans gathered their tools and prepared their operation, Allied forces waited, unsure what would happen next. They didn't know the details. They didn't know the plan. They only knew one thing: humans were finally moving, and whenever humans moved, the game changed. That belief, small as it was, gave people a reason to take a deeper breath, straighten their backs, and hope again. Soon, everyone across the Alliance, soldiers, civilians, leaders, would learn that the moment Earth stepped into a fight, things never stayed the same. But for now, all they could do was wait and watch as humanity prepared to walk onto a battlefield that was already almost lost. No one knew it yet, but this was the moment when everything quietly began to turn. Even before the first move was made, even before the first operation was launched, the war had already started to feel different. Because the Allies weren't alone anymore. And sometimes, just knowing humanity was coming was enough to bring a little light back into a dark sky. Something no one expected, Earth replying faster than the Council thought possible. The message wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or filled with promises. It was direct and almost strangely calm. Humans said they were ready to help, but only if the Allied worlds allowed them to see everything, every record, every failure, every detail that had been collected since the war began. Many leaders didn't know how to react. They were used to allies asking for weapons, or troops, or political agreements, but humans didn't ask for any of that. They wanted data, and not just the polished parts. They wanted the broken pieces too, the damaged recordings, the half-finished transmissions, the messy logs written during battles. It was as if they believed answers were hiding inside the chaos. At first, the Council hesitated. What if humans judged them for all the mistakes made during the early days of the war? What if humans looked at the information and decided the war was already doomed? But after a long debate, they agreed to send everything. They knew pride couldn't save them now. Within hours, huge data streams traveled toward Earth. Footage of burning outposts, audio clips of frightened pilots calling for assistance, maps of enemy movements, scribbled reports from exhausted soldiers. Everything was sent. No one knew how long it would take humans to sort through all of it. Some assumed it would require weeks, maybe even months, but humans didn't waste time. On Earth, the moment the data arrived, large rooms lit up with busy screens. People went to work in teams, using tools the Council didn't fully understand. Some analysts studied enemy flight paths, tracing thin lines across digital maps like artists drawing patterns. Others listened to shaky radio calls, rewinding them carefully, catching small details hidden in the noise. Some studied the way the enemy built their formations. Some focused only on timing, and others looked at supply chains, trying to find a breakpoint. To the Allied observers watching through shared communication channels, the process felt unreal. Humans didn't act panicked. They didn't act stressed. They looked focused, almost peaceful, as if solving a puzzle instead of preparing for war. One Council member whispered to another, "Do they always work like this?" His colleague responded, "I think this is their way." Meanwhile, life across the Allied worlds continued under the shadow of the advancing enemy. Families stayed close to emergency shelters. Soldiers trained harder than ever, even though many felt they were carrying the weight of something too heavy to lift. Everyone waited for news. Even those who once doubted Earth's involvement now found themselves watching the skies quietly, wondering when the humans would step in. In one remote outpost, a small group gathered around an old screen showing live updates. They saw a tiny message appear at the bottom. Earth request acknowledged. Analysis ongoing. It wasn't much, but it made someone whisper, "At least they're looking." Another replied, "That's more than we had yesterday." Inside Council halls, tension built with each passing day. The leaders gathered for long meetings, sometimes barely speaking as they waited for Earth to send something, anything. Whenever the communication screen made a noise, heads lifted instantly. Whenever someone entered the room with a tablet, everyone turned to look. Finally, after several days of silence, a transmission blinked into view. No one breathed as the message loaded. Humans had finished their analysis, but the message didn't come with a long explanation. It didn't come with warnings or doubts. It came with only one request. The humans wanted control of the next major operation. One large mission. All forces involved would follow human planning from start to finish. At first, a council looked at one another, unsure what to say. Giving full control of a major operation to another species was not something they had ever done before. Some were worried it would make their people look weak. Others feared humans might take unnecessary risks. But deep down, everyone knew something important they had no better idea. Everything they tried had failed. Every strategy they trusted had been predicted by the enemy. They needed something completely new. And humans were known for bringing the unexpected. The council debated, but not for long. They approved Earth's request and sent confirmation. The moment that message left the council hall, a quiet feeling of change spread through the room. Leaders didn't know if this would save them, but it felt like the first real step forward in months. On Earth, large command rooms flickered with new activity. People gathered around long tables, maps reshaped, holographic models updated. Human. Officers spoke calmly, discussing possibilities that others had never considered. They didn't talk about retreat or delay. They talked about creating pressure points, breaking patterns, and using timing as a weapon. An allied representative watching through a shared link noticed something strange. The humans didn't argue. They didn't shout. They didn't panic. They listened to one another, adjusted ideas, and kept going. To them, the war was not a story of doom. It was a problem that hadn't been solved, yet another observer commented softly, "They're not scared." Why aren't they scared? Someone replied, "Because they see something we don't." Humans requested a full breakdown of a specific region of space, the region where the next major battle would occur. They studied the terrain, asteroid fields, abandoned stations, broken satellites, even the radiation flow left from old battles. They noted small details that the Allied forces thought were meaningless. To the humans, nothing was small. While all this planning was happening, the soldiers on the Allied outposts felt something had shifted. Rumors began spreading. Some said humans had discovered enemy weaknesses never seen before. Others said humans were preparing a completely new style of attack. No one really knew the details. The humans weren't sharing the full plan yet, not even with the Council. Some allies found this odd, but the more they watched the humans work, the more they realized something. Humans didn't hide information out of pride. They hid it because they were trying to protect everyone from confusion and doubt. They wanted to present a clean path, not a messy collection of half-built ideas. At a small training base, a group of soldiers sat around a table eating simple rations. One of them said, "Do you think humans can really change all this?" Another shrugged and answered, "I don't know. But everyone says when humans join, things don't stay the same." A third added, "At this point, I'll take anything that isn't another loss." Back in the council's main chamber, leaders gathered. In front of a large screen, a new message from Earth had arrived. This time, it contained the first stage of the plan. Not the whole thing, just the opening move. When the council read it, they exchanged surprised looks. The move was small, almost too simple. It didn't involve heavy attacks. It didn't involve massive fleets. It involved precision, timing, and a few well-coordinated units moving quietly through sectors where the enemy wasn't paying attention. Some council members frowned, unsure of something. So subtle could make a difference. But others understood something important. If humans had found a weakness, even a tiny one, they would use it like a doorway. They didn't believe in striking everything at once. They believed in finding the one place where pressure could break the entire pattern. Meanwhile, on the human command floor, no one looked excited or dramatic. They looked steady, determined, ready. They weren't acting like saviors. They were acting like people who had a job to do. Hours later, small allied teams received quiet instructions from the human planners. Nothing loud, nothing attention-grabbing, just simple orders guiding them into position. Some teams moved through dark space lanes, turning off unnecessary lights. Others waited near old debris fields, hiding behind broken metal until they received the signal. A few pilots whispered to each other that it didn't feel like the start of a big war. It felt like the beginning of a trick no one else saw coming. Across many worlds, Civilians still didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. They continued their routines, carrying their worries like heavy bags. But some sensed something different in the daily updates. There were fewer desperate messages. Leaders looked a little less tense. And in the eyes of some soldiers, there was a spark that had been missing for a long time. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even hope yet. It was something quieter. The feeling that someone finally understood the enemy. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was a path out of this. And as the human plan continued to form, as small teams slipped into position, and the council watched with growing curiosity, one truth became clear across every corner of the alliance. Humans were preparing to shift the game. No one knew how. No one knew when. But everyone could feel that the war was no longer moving in only one direction. Something was changing. Something was building. The enemy had no idea what was coming. The Allies didn't fully understand it either, but humanity did. And that silent confidence, spreading from Earth to every connected world, was the beginning of a turning point no one would forget. Quietly, almost too quietly. There were no speeches, no massive troop gatherings, and no dramatic music playing in the background. Instead, everything moved in a calm, controlled way. Humans didn't waste time explaining every detail. They simply started building the plan, piece by piece, like someone solving a puzzle that others didn't even know existed. Inside the main Allied command center, officers and council members watched the screens with confusion. They were expecting humans to request large fleets, heavy weapons, or dramatic reinforcements. Instead, humans were asking for small units, scout reports, and access to old files many thought weren't useful anymore. One council member finally asked, "Why do they want such small teams? Don't they see how big the enemy forces are?" An older officer replied softly, "They do see, but they see something else too." What humans saw, what no one else noticed, was the rhythm of the enemy. Not just their ships or weapons, but the way they moved, the timing between attacks, the pattern in their retreats, the tiny mistakes they made when they felt too confident. Humans studied the war like they were studying a heartbeat, learning where it slowed, where it rushed, and where it could be stopped. In one of Earth's underground planning rooms, a group of human analysts stared at a large board filled with lines, symbols, and points. They weren't just looking at battles. They were looking between the battles, the pauses, the silence, the space where something important often hides. One analyst pointed at a point on the map. "Look at this gap." They leave it unguarded every 4 days for about 3 hours. Another added, "This path here, every time they advance, it takes them 20 minutes longer to deliver support. That delay is not an accident. Something's wrong in their chain." They traced every detail with the same patience someone would, used to understand an ancient text. To the Allied observers, it looked overwhelming. But to the humans, it was simple, because they weren't looking for something big. They were looking for something that could lead to something big. Meanwhile, out near the front lines, small Allied squads received messages from commanders who looked more confused than ever. The instructions were unusual. Move here, stop here, wait in silence, avoid detection, gather small pieces of information, hold position without engaging unless absolutely necessary. One soldier whispered to another, "Are we really going to win a war by standing still?" The other shrugged. "If the humans say so, maybe they know something we don't." While the squads positioned themselves, the humans continued adjusting their plan. They didn't just look at the enemy. They studied their own allies too, where they were strong, where they were tired, and where support was stretched thin. Humans believed a chain was strongest when every link was understood. A young Allied technician watched as a group of humans reviewed the files. She noticed something strange. Humans paid attention to the smallest mistakes in the reports. A pilot, fumbling with words during a panicked call, a misplaced ship that drifted farther than intended, a wrong time stamp. To the Allies, these were accidents. But to humans, every small error told a story. The human lead strategist finally spoke. "They're confident," he said. "Too confident. And confidence creates blind spots." He pointed to a cluster of enemy symbols. "These formations don't change. They think no one will try to break their rhythm. That's our doorway." The Allies stared at the map. They didn't see a doorway. They saw danger. But by now, they had learned to wait before judging the human approach. Across the Allied systems, word spread that humans were not planning a massive battle. They were planning something smaller, almost surgical. Some people doubted it. Some were scared. But others started feeling something else: curiosity. Humans always had a strange way of doing things. They weren't stronger, but they were unpredictable, and unpredictability made them dangerous in a good way. Back on Earth, human teams ran silent simulations. They tested the smallest changes. What would happen if they moved a single squad 2 minutes earlier? What if a sensor was placed behind an abandoned station? What if a decoy signal went out at the right moment? Every detail mattered. They found something big hidden inside something small. The enemy didn't just have a weakness, they had several. Weaknesses that connected to each other, like hidden doors in a long hallway. And if the humans opened the first door, all the others would open as well. The first step involved a region that had been ignored for months, an old mining corridor, filled with broken rocks and abandoned machinery. The Allies thought it was useless. The enemy thought it was too messy to occupy. But the humans saw potential. They saw a passage where signals bent strangely, where sensors often failed, and where small units could hide for days without being noticed. An Allied officer asked the humans, "Why this place?" "There's nothing there." The human strategist replied, "Exactly. Because no one is looking." The humans explained their plan in simple terms. They wanted small Allied squads to remain hidden in the mining corridor. They wanted to send a harmless decoy signal that would create the illusion of movement. The enemy would sense it, assume it was a minor threat, and send a small patrol. That patrol would unknowingly expose a deeper weakness in their communication line. Once exposed, the humans would use that opening not with violence, but with disruption. The Allies listened, trying to understand. "So, you're not planning to destroy anything?" one asked. "Not yet," the human replied. "We're planning to make them stumble." Disruption. That was the key. Humans didn't believe in smashing the enemy with force. They believed in breaking the enemy's confidence. They believed that once the enemy felt off balance, their entire structure would start shaking. Meanwhile, the soldiers hiding in the mining corridor felt the tension growing. The place was quiet, the air still, the smell of old metal lingering. Around them, they stayed low, checking their equipment, waiting for the signal. Some whispered jokes to ease the pressure. Others stayed silent, watching their heartbeats on their wrist monitors. One soldier finally said, "It doesn't feel like a war. It feels like a game of nerves." Another replied, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe you win by making the other." Sighed nervous first. Back in the command center, humans monitored everything. They watched small dots representing Allied units. They watched enemy movement patterns shifting slightly each hour. They watched communication lines flicker with traffic. They waited for the perfect moment. Timing was everything. Humans didn't want to act early or late. They wanted to strike when the enemy was neither ready nor relaxed, when they were in that narrow space between comfort and alertness. Finally, one human officer looked at the strategist and said, "It's happening." The enemy had just rotated one of their scout teams. A tiny shift, but enough. The blind spot humans predicted had opened. The strategist quietly gave the order to send the decoy signal. A simple pulse of energy, small enough to seem accidental, but clear enough to attract attention. In the mining corridor, the hidden Allied squads saw their screens blink. The signal had been sent. Minutes later, enemy patrols began moving toward the corridor. They weren't rushing. They weren't defensive. They were curious, almost casual. Exactly the way humans predicted they would be. The Allied squads did nothing. They stayed hidden, holding their breath. The enemy passed close, scanning lightly, thinking nothing was wrong. But in that moment, the humans watched something more important happening. The enemy shifted a group of support ships to cover the patrol, and by doing so, they exposed a communication gap behind them. A fragile link. The strategist leaned forward. "There it is," he whispered. "The crack." He signaled a small human team positioned far away to send a disguised interference burst. Not an attack, not a strike, just a disturbance. The burst traveled quietly across space and hit the exposed link. For a few seconds, the enemy's internal network flickered. Messages were delayed. Orders were repeated. A tiny confusion spread across their formation. The allies in the mining corridor didn't even know a disruption had occurred. Only the human command room saw it clearly, and they smiled. Not a smile of victory, but a smile of confirmation. The first door had opened. Back in the council hall, the leaders didn't fully understand what humans had done. All they received was a simple update. Phase 1 successful. Prepare for Phase 2. One council member whispered, "They're doing something subtle." Another added, "And it's working." Across the Allied worlds, the atmosphere began to shift. No one saw a battle. No explosions, no dramatic attacks. But something felt different. It was like the air itself sensed that a new direction had been set. The enemy, unaware of the disruption, continued operating normally. But they didn't know that a small imbalance had been created. A balance that humans would use again and again. Humans weren't planning a single victory. They were building a chain of moves. Each one small. Each one quietly shifting the war. And the Allied worlds watching from afar felt something they hadn't felt in months. The beginning of hope. The days that followed felt heavier than anything the coalition had faced before. Rumors moved across stations, faster than official messages. Everyone kept repeating the same thing in different ways. The humans were planning something. No one knew what it was. No one had seen it, but everyone felt it. Even the emptiness of space seemed to stay quiet, as if waiting. On the main command deck of the joint fleet, the atmosphere was strange. People worked with focus, but the usual small laughs or casual words were gone. Even those who normally stayed calm now carried a kind of sharpness in their eyes. The kind you see in people who have lived through too many close calls. At the center of the deck stood the human coordinator, tired but steady. Over the last weeks, he had barely slept, barely eaten, only stopping long enough to reset his thoughts before diving back into work. The alien officers noticed it too. One of them whispered to another, "Humans. They break rules when pushed. They don't stay predictable." And maybe that was exactly what the coalition needed. A signal came through an encrypted human-only transmission. No one else could access it, not even the highest-ranking alien officers. That alone made the room shift with unease. Some of them looked at the human coordinator, trying to read his face. He simply nodded once and walked away to a private room. He returned 10 minutes later, and something about him had changed. His posture was still tired, but his eyes looked firm, clear like someone who had found an answer after weeks of searching in the dark. "We move in 12 hours. He said. The room froze. One alien officer stepped forward. "Move where?" "Our fleets are losing ground. We can't push against the enemy lines in this condition. The human shook his head. We're not attacking their lines. Then what are we doing? He simply replied, changing the rules. No one understood that answer, but no one argued either. Sometimes the human way of explaining things came in pieces, never fully clear until the moment it mattered. The coalition had learned to trust that 12 hours later, the joint fleet gathered near the edge of a cold, dim system. The star barely lit the planets around it, turning them into shapes rather than worlds. It was a place the enemy never checked, because there was nothing valuable here, no resources, no bases, nothing but rocks and silence. Perfect for what the humans needed. Coalition ships formed a scattered circle, keeping watch while the humans prepared something in the center. Dozens of human support vessels floated in tight formation, each one carrying long metal containers attached beneath their hulls. At first glance, they looked harmless, like storage units or engineering supplies. But the coalition soon understood they were not. The humans released the locks, and the containers slowly drifted outward. Panels unfolded, segments extended. Strange shapes emerged, thin frames, glowing conductors, curved arcs that hummed with energy. It looked like hundreds of floating puzzle pieces coming alive one by one. Alien officers stared in confusion. Is that a weapon? One asked. No, the human coordinator said quietly. It's something bigger. As the structures linked together, the shape became clearer, an enormous ring, large enough to fit several battleships inside it. Sparks of light moved across its frame, jumping between the arcs like small stars. Another alien asked, Is this some kind of portal? Not exactly, the human said. It's a field skew engine. A large-scale one. Many aliens exchanged uneasy looks. They had heard of small devices that bent local gravity, but nothing this size, nothing this complex. Certainly nothing that used energy patterns like these. The human could see the questions forming and added, It's been banned for years. Too unstable for civilian use. Too unpredictable to put on a ship. But after what happened to our fleets, we don't have the luxury to play safe anymore. One alien swallowed hard. What does it do? It lets us send something behind enemy lines without traveling the distance in real space. Some aliens gasped. Others stared. The human wasn't finished. And it doesn't need a hyperspace route. Now they understood why the humans looked tired, why they kept working in silence, why they stopped asking for permission from anyone else. They had built a device that could break the boundaries of the war. Within minutes, the ring began generating a deep vibration, like a distant storm, rolling through metal. The stars around it seemed to ripple slightly, as if space itself was exhaling. A faint circular haze formed in the center of the structure. The aliens watched with a mix of fear and awe. The device didn't just bend physics. It looked like it was arguing with it. Ships adjusted their positions. Officers monitored data streams. Human engineers checked every last parameter, shouting across platforms, Hold the field, don't let it collapse. Increase the stabilization on the left arc. Keep the energy channels balanced. Then came the moment. A single human warship approached the ring, small compared to the big cruisers, but fast and thickly armored. It slid into position, its engines quiet, its hull dim. It looked like a hunter preparing to enter a wild forest. One of the aliens whispered, Are you really sending just one? Yes, the human replied, because one is all we need. The ring pulsed. The haze in its center thickened into a bright, trembling surface. The warship drifted forward, entering the field. For a moment, it looked like it was melting into light. Then it vanished, gone in a single flicker, as if swallowed by a silent heartbeat of the universe. The coalition officers stared at the empty ring. One of them spoke softly. Did it work? We'll know soon, the human coordinator said, but deep inside, he already knew it had. The warship emerged instantly near the enemies. Central Command grid, a place that would normally require weeks to reach, even through hyperspace. Its appearance triggered alarms everywhere. Enemy towers turned. Automated defenses lit up. Hundreds of weapons locked onto the ship. But the humans didn't come to fight. Their ship released something small, almost unnoticeable. A device no larger than a cargo container. It streaked toward the enemy's communication core, then attached. Itself like a magnet dot, and then it began. Across the enemy network, lights flickered. Systems froze. Command signals broke apart. Warships waiting for orders received nothing. Drones drifted, confused. Even their strategic AI went silent, looping the same incomplete sequence again and again. The Coalition didn't need weapons for this part. They just needed chaos. Back at the hidden system, the human coordinator received the confirmation. "It's done," a voice said through the secured channel. He exhaled for the first time in hours. "Move the fleet," he ordered. Coalition ships jumped forward with renewed spirit, this time pushing into enemy territory with coordination they hadn't felt in months. Enemy formations stumbled. Their timing collapsed. Their advantage shattered. For the first time since the war began, the Coalition wasn't defending. They were advancing. News spread across ships like wildfire. Pilots shouted to each other. Engineers clapped. Even the quiet ones finally smiled. Someone said, "Humans actually did it." Someone else replied, "No, they changed everything." Far in the distance, the giant ring flickered, its energy nearly exhausted. It wouldn't survive a second operation, not yet, but it didn't matter. It had already served its purpose. The device might have been unstable. It might have been risky. It might have even been reckless, but it had done exactly what the humans promised. It shifted the game. And now the universe would have to catch up. The Coalition, once on the edge of collapse, pushed forward not with fear, but with belief. Belief that they still had a chance. Belief that the enemy wasn't invincible. Belief that humans, with all their messy ideas and dangerous inventions, had given them one more path to survive. And as the fleets moved deeper into battle, the human coordinator watched the stars ahead and whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." Because he knew Part 5 would be harder, but he also knew something more. The Coalition wasn't losing anymore. They had hope again. And in war, sometimes that was the strongest weapon of all. The next few days felt like the whole galaxy had changed its rhythm. For months, the Coalition had been fighting with fear, sitting heavy on every ship, every corridor, every quiet moment. But now something was different. People walked faster, talked louder, and carried a spark in their eyes that had been missing for far too long. Hope. Real hope. Not the forced kind that commanders repeat during briefings, but the natural kind that grows when something impossible suddenly becomes real. But even with that hope, no one forgot the truth. The war wasn't over. Not even close. On the human command deck, the coordinator stood with his hands braced on the table, looking at the latest reports. His body ached from exhaustion, but he didn't sit. He couldn't. Not when everything they had fought for now depended on the next steps. A Coalition officer approached. "The enemy's main grid is still offline," he reported. "Their fleets are confused, but they're starting to reorganize." The human nodded. "They'll adapt. They always do." Another officer added, "Our forces want to keep pushing. They think we can finish this." The human didn't answer right away. He stared at the star map, watching the red enemy markers, slowly shifting like restless animals waking up again. "We can't just rush forward," he finally said. "Not yet." The alien officers looked confused. To them, this was their moment. They wanted to strike while the enemy was still weak. The human saw the doubt and explained, "If we charge too fast, we'll stretch our supply lines. Their disruption." will fade, and when their systems come back, we could be trapped. It was a simple truth, but one that many didn't want to hear. Across the fleet, soldiers felt excited, motivated, almost ready to celebrate. But the commanders knew better. War didn't reward excitement. It punished impatience. The human coordinator turned to his team. We didn't win. We just opened a door. Now we have to walk through it the right way. He sent new orders across. The fleets, adjust formations, strengthen shielding, regroup with damaged units, prepare for a coordinated advance, not a reckless one. Some officers were disappointed, but they still followed. Because after the ring mission, no one questioned human judgment anymore. Hours later, the coalition fleets moved forward again, but this time with precision. They didn't sprint. They marched. Every move felt controlled. Every formation had purpose. Every step forward came with stability. The enemy tried to respond. They attempted to rebuild their command grid. They tried to reassign units, but the disruption slowed them. Their reactions were messy, delayed, uncoordinated. And for once, the coalition wasn't the one scrambling. Still, the humans knew the enemy would recover eventually. Nothing stayed broken forever. That meant they needed a second advantage, something that didn't rely on the unstable ring. Something they could maintain. And so, while the frontline fleets advanced, human engineers worked deep inside the support vessels, surrounded by cables, tools, and glowing monitors. They weren't sleeping either. They didn't have time. One of them said quietly, "We only need to make it stable for one more operation." Another replied, "I still can't believe we're rebuilding it out here." The ring was damaged from the first jump, but the humans weren't trying to restore it fully. They were creating a smaller version, one that could run once, maybe twice, before burning itself out. A temporary doorway. The idea was simple but daring. Send a small team behind enemy lines again, not to disrupt this time, but to plant something. The enemy wouldn't see until it was too late. A pressure wave of tension moved through the coalition ships as rumors spread about Operation 2. No one knew its details. No one was supposed to. Only a handful of humans and a few trusted coalition officers were briefed. But the human coordinator knew. This operation would decide the war. The small ring activated quietly. No build-up like last time. No giant light. Show. It flickered faintly and hummed like a tired machine on its last hours. The team boarded a compact ship, each member silent, their faces set with calm determination. They weren't chosen because they were strong or famous. They were chosen because they didn't hesitate not when things mattered. The coordinator watched them go. He didn't give a long speech. He simply said, "Whatever happens, keep moving forward." The ship entered the field, and it was gone. The coalition continued fighting, pressing deeper into enemy territory, while the enemy scrambled for stability. Without their central grid, their coordination was a mess. Their ships often clashed with each other, unsure of orders. Their drones drifted without guidance. Their firepower was still dangerous, but their direction had shattered. Even with this advantage, the coalition kept losing people. War didn't suddenly become easy. Explosions still shook hulls, alarms still screamed, medics still raced down corridors carrying stretchers. No one forgot what was at stake. Time passed. And then, late into the night cycle, the human coordinator received a message. The screen blinked once. A tiny symbol appeared, one that only humans recognized. The officer standing nearby leaned in. "Are they alive?" The human nodded slowly. "They made it. The second operation had succeeded." "Are they on there?" "Way back?" "No," the human said quietly. "They stayed." Silence filled the command room. Everyone understood what that meant. The team knew the mission was one way. They knew before they left, and they still went. The device, planted small, hidden and harmless until activated, sat deep in the enemy system network. It didn't attack, didn't explode, didn't destroy. It simply waited for one command. The coordinator didn't give it yet, not until the coalition reached the final line. The largest enemy formation gathered ahead, blocking the path to their central stronghold. Hundreds of ships formed a massive wall of metal, light, and fury. It was the biggest force the coalition had ever faced. Coalition pilots stared at the sight on their screens. Some felt fear squeezing their chests. Others gripped their controls tighter. One whispered, "We can't break through that." The enemy wall started to advance. The coalition held position. The human coordinator stood on the deck, watching it unfold. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He was waiting for the exact second dot, and then he saw it, the tiny shift in the enemy's formation where all their system links converged. That was the moment. He spoke one word. Now. A single signal left the coalition flagship. It traveled, silently, invisible, untraceable. It reached the hidden device buried inside the enemy's core. The device woke up, and every enemy system froze at once. Ships halted. Weapons paused mid-charge. Engines flickered. Their entire formation collapsed like a giant machine that suddenly forgot how to function. The humans hadn't destroyed the enemy. They simply turned off the part of their network that told them what to do. The coalition didn't waste a second. "Advance!" The coordinator shouted. Pilots pushed forward. Fleets surged through the broken wall like a wave finally freed from its damned dot. It wasn't an easy battle, even then. The enemy still fought, but without direction, they were scattered. The coalition moved with purpose, discipline, and the strength they had rebuilt over the last week. Hours later, the final enemy command node was captured. As the coalition secured it, silence began spreading across the battlefield, not a frightening silence, but a peaceful one. The war that once felt unwinnable was ending. On the human flagship, the coordinator stood alone near the observation window. Outside, the stars looked calm again. For the first time in months, the universe didn't feel like it was burning. An officer approached. "We won," he said softly. The human didn't smile widely. He didn't celebrate. He simply breathed out slowly, as if letting go of a weight he had carried for far too long. "Not because we were stronger," he said, "but because we refused to stop trying." Across the coalition fleets, people celebrated quietly. Some cried. Some hugged each other. Some just sat down and finally allowed themselves to rest. Later, as the fleets turned toward home, many whispered the same thing. They were losing the war until the humans shifted the game. And everyone knew it was true.